You're listening to This Motorcycle Life, conversations about why we ride. Episode 15, 1,000 Words. I'm Bruce Philp. Thanks for listening. Well, things are going to get a little bit highbrow in this episode because we're going to talk about art. Don't give up on me yet, though, because it's motorcycle art we're going to talk about, and my guest is going to make it more than worth the listen. You'll meet him in a moment, but first, let's take care of some housekeeping. As always, I want to acknowledge the support and encouragement of my friends at Eat, Sleep, Ride. The stories in these podcasts are about riders like you and me, and the Eat, Sleep, Ride app is a great way to meet them. I use mine to track my rides, discover new roads, and connect with other riders, and all that is free. But you can also upgrade the app to add a crash detection technology called Crashlight. I don't ride without it. You can download the ESR app from the App Store or from Google Play, and it might just become your favorite accessory. I also want to say thanks to you for your support and for your iTunes ratings and emails. I know I've said this before, but these really do mean a lot. This is not a commercial venture, so knowing someone's listening and gets what I'm trying to do is what makes it worthwhile. And speaking of emails, I also have to give a special shout-out to Olivier from Belgium, who coincidentally wrote as I was producing this episode to say that he thought that art might make a good topic. Well, you read my mind, Olivier. This one's for you. Okay, here we go. So, wherever there are motorcycles, there are emotions. And wherever there are emotions, there will eventually be art. So it's not surprising that motorcycles and art have been constant companions almost from the beginning. A century ago, motorcycles symbolized the wonders of the machine age. After World War II, the meaning of motorcycles changed and they became symbols of counterculture, and that seemed to make them even more fascinating to artists. By the 1980s and 90s, things shifted again, and it seemed like artists suddenly discovered a fascination for the motorcycle as an object. Keith Haring used them as canvases, and the Guggenheim Museum displayed them like tribal artifacts. Well, if you're starting to nod off already, it's okay, and you're probably not alone. And here's the reason. Of all the artists who've used motorcycles in their work over the last 100 years, not many of them were actually riders. And even fewer attempted to really understand why these things are so fascinating. Motorcycles for them were just a convenient shorthand for something and someone other than the people who actually ride them. That, finally, has started to change. If you've been to a custom show in the last few years, you've no doubt seen space dedicated to art right alongside the bikes. And you may have seen that a lot of this art has been created not by observers, but by riders themselves. And you may have found yourself actually pausing to look at it, maybe even liking it, and maybe even taking some home with you. Well, if you're like me, you might just think this is a good thing for motorcycle culture, and you might just be a little curious as to how it came to be. To get an insider's point of view on this, I pretty much just had to turn my chair around. Hanging on the wall behind my desk is a print by an artist who goes by the name of Tempus Deficit. It was a gift from my wife after I had discovered and raved about his work in a traveling exhibit called Oil and Ink. The image is like something from a childhood dream. A bike and a rider floating in the sky, suspended from a big red balloon. Well, it kind of spoke to me, so I thought I'd speak to the man who made it. Tempus Deficit is Douglas Thompson, and I reached him at his home in Connecticut. Hey, Doug, how are you doing?
Hey, Bruce, good to talk to you. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thanks, and it's great to talk to you. Thanks for joining me. I'm really excited about this conversation, partly because I love what you do, which we'll get into, but also because we had this super nerdy conversation about art and motorcycles last week, which I totally enjoyed. So I'm hoping we can, touch on all that stuff again without, sounding like a couple of liberal arts undergrads. So
you found my weakness, Bruce,
and mine apparently. So let's give it a try. I've got a million questions, but why don't we dive in by just having you introduce yourself? How long have you been riding? How did it start? And what do you ride?
Well, I've been riding now for almost 15 years. I started riding in 2004. I bought my first bike, which was a Honda Hawk GT, and I've owned three of them over the years. So that bike kind of has a special place in my heart. What's funny is I've never drawn one in any of my, at least not in any of my pieces that see the light of day.
Right.
But what I'm riding now, and what shows up most frequently in my artwork, is a Triumph Bonneville, or what I ride is a Thruxton. Same difference, but a lot of Triumph motorcycles. The modern classics show up in my artwork, and I like them for. Just the riding piece aside. Being more familiar with that particular bike, it just makes it easier to introduce it into a art piece, because it's just something that I'm familiar with.
Right. and I'm going to ask you something about that later on, but at the risk of overanalyzing it, but I'll hold that back until we get there.
Sure.
And how did it all start? I mean, this may not seem relevant to the topic of this conversation, but I think it might be. So I'm curious to know, how did you start? How did motorcycling first enter your life?
Oh my God. Okay, so let me back way up. When I was a kid, I can remember being fascinated with motorcycles, and I remember my two of my uncles had motorcycles, and one had a gorgeous chopper that I'll always remember, and it just always sort of marinated in my brain, I guess. So as soon as I was out of the house and had put together the means to pick up a motorcycle of my own, I did it as immediately as I could. It's just something that always fascinated me. I've just always loved motorcycles. So I've been riding every chance I get ever since.
Yeah, it's funny how that marination is part of so many people's stories. It's funny, when I first saw your artwork, I imagined that you were a lifelong rider who had recently become an artist, and that's not a reflection of the quality of the work. Just let me head that off. But more about the enthusiasm in it. But that's not actually how it happened, is it? Your life as an artist is also quite long.
Yeah, it really is the other way around. Like I said, I didn't start writing till I was 24, but I've been drawing since I could hold a pencil, and growing up, that was just my favorite thing to do, and that's never really changed. So I've always done art. I'm new to doing it, relatively new to doing it professionally, where I'm showing my work and I'm selling my work. I didn't start doing that until 2 or 3 years ago. Maybe three or four now. When I first joined Oil and Ink, the traveling motorcycle art expo that John Christensen does. That was, let me think now. I want to say it was 2016 that I joined that show with one of my art pieces for that year's expo. The way that it came about, joining that to motorcycles, really was Oil and Ink, and wanting to be a part of that show. I had been introduced to that by the French artist Lorenzo Watercolor, whose work I just absolutely love, and I commissioned him to do a poster for a rally that I was organizing, and we've just developed this beautiful friendship by correspondence, really, because I've never been over there yet. But we talk quite frequently, and he really inspired me to kick it up a notch with my artwork and take it from being a hobby to something that I, taking my own work a little more seriously.
Right.
So he introduced me to John Christensen and the Oil and Ink show. And it kind of started me thinking about, well, how do I set this apart? One, how do I get into this show with some artwork that this crowd is going to want to see in the first place, and catch the eye of riders who are interested in art. And how do I make it my own? How do I find my voice with that? So it got me thinking about how I could use motorcycles in my art, which I'd never done before. And to have something to say. So I let that kind of stew for a while, and played around with some different things. And at the 2015, I think it was, Oil and Ink in Brooklyn, I met up with John and showed him some of my work, and a lot of it was nothing like what I'm doing now, except it had some motorcycles. But other than that, I was just sort of playing around, and the two pieces that he really thought were interesting were what's now Copilot, the piece that I have with a Triumph rider floating with balloons, mess of balloons attached to his bike, and a dog looking up.
Right.
That's Copilot. And the other was a study that became Kite. The rider that's pulling a kite behind him.
Right.
And he loved those, so I took it and ran with it, and it's sort of become its own beast. I've done so many variations on the theme, and I still feel like I haven't exhausted it yet.
I think you told me when we spoke last week that and I'm thinking in particular about the balloons, that idea had come to you in a conversation with one of your kids. Is that right?
It was sort of a collection of different things. It wasn't so much a conversation with my son. Now, my oldest son is 8. My youngest is 3. And my oldest, who was about 6 at the time, really didn't care one way or the other about motorcycles and the artwork that I was doing, and I kind of wanted to entertain him with it and make him giggle and come up with something that would connect with him. And because a lot of what I do is directly or indirectly is always going to be connected with them. And so instead of just trying to reach this motorcycling audience, primarily as I was playing around with different themes, I wanted to do something that was going to connect with him. And so I stuck a balloon on some bikes and made them float. And lo and behold, he actually thought it was funny. He's always been a tough crowd. It's kind of difficult to impress with stuff like that. So, oh, that's nice, Daddy, and moving on. So for him to smirk at it or get a giggle out of him with something like that, my thinking is, yes, okay, now I've got something here. And when we're done, I should take a picture and I'll email it to you. Not that much longer not too much later after I had done this this first couple of ideas, fleshing that out, and trying to develop some ideas for Oil and Ink. When I did Copilot with the dog, he took one of his Legos and a little Lego motorcycle with a rider on it, and stuck the little Lego balloon on it, and taped it to a piece of blue construction paper for the sky, and drew a dog, and gave it to me.
Wow!
And it was his version of my artwork. Yeah,
that's amazing.
Let me tell you, that was powerful. And the part that I loved was that he gave it to me, and I was going to hang it on the refrigerator. And he said, "No, I want you to hang this on the wall in your bedroom, next to one of the prints that I have from Lorenzo.
Right.
So he wanted it to have pride of place, and it's still there 2 years later.
Yeah, there's only one answer to that request, isn't there?
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask you next what impact that piece had on him after the role that he played in inspiring it, but I guess I've got my answer. That's fantastic. That's so good. So I guess this is as good a time as any to talk about the balloons, and I don't mean to suggest that this is sort of the defining attribute of your work, but it happens to be how I found it. And I remember quite clearly discovering your work online, and it was a piece that I now have a copy of hanging on my office wall, of a motorcycle floating under a single balloon. And I remember leaping out of my chair to show my wife and saying to her, "This is how it feels to ride a motorbike. This is how it feels. Not all that sort of flaming, raging, tearing down the road, burning down villages and pillaging and making mayhem. But this is how it feels to ride a bike." And, I get that you came upon that imagery, the way that you did, but I have to believe it's come to mean something else. What do people tell you about it?
It never fails to amaze me how many people connect with this imagery. And a friend of mine actually pointed out that I've developed kind of a visual language here, and it was neat to hear it put into those terms, because that really what it is. When you're trying to create a piece of art, what you're trying to do is connect with the viewer, and certainly what I'm trying to do is connect with the viewer and say something and let it mean something, provide something that means something to them. The means to doing that is creating this visual language, and call it hieroglyphics. I don't know, but the balloons are just one visual tool that I'm using to say what I'm trying to say, and what I'm trying to put out there is exactly that pure joy of riding. And it's so difficult to explain in words how it feels to be on the back of this machine that, unless you really understand physics, makes absolutely no sense why it works.
Right. Yes, that's right.
You've got this, we were talking about the three gyroscopes, last week when we talked, and but until you get down into the science of it, which you're really not doing when you're riding, you're just feeling. It feels like something that shouldn't work. You're flying down the road at speed on this thing that only has two wheels, so if you stopped and weren't on it to balance it, it's going to go over. So you're flying down the road on this thing that shouldn't be upright, and you're leaning into turns, so you're going sideways to suddenly in another direction. You may as well be on a magic carpet, and that's really what it feels like. I mean, I love going through a twisty road and just folding it over and over again. And it just feels like you're floating. And don't laugh, I have a fear of heights. And you couldn't really tell this by my artwork. But going down the road, floating like that, is just an incredible experience. And I know I'm sure that you understand what I'm trying to say. It's hard to say it in words, and to put it into an image. For me, it's much easier to use that visual language to convey how we feel.
Yeah. Well, that's well put. I'm
feeling extremely ineloquent right now.
That just means you're an artist. You're not actually supposed to be able to speak about your work. That's everybody else's job. So, just know that you're in an unfair position as we speak.
Well, I don't have that excuse either, because I talk for a living, and I was an English major as an undergrad. So what's my excuse?
I'm just trying to help you out.
And you know what? That's the other thing that I really should explain for those that aren't familiar with the backstory of my work, I'm a therapist. So what I do professionally, when I'm not doing the art, my day job is I'm talking to people all day, and I'm providing mental health care, and that's the flip side of what I'm trying to say here. It's sort of the story underneath all of this joy of riding. Riding is my sanity so much of the time. It's an escape. It's different than when you get in a car and you have those four walls around you, and there's a reason that we call it a cage. It's insular.
Yeah. And
it doesn't have that feeling of getting on the bike where you're not gonna text from your bike. You're not gonna eat your sandwich when you're riding your bike down the road. You have to be tuned in. It's a very focused and meditative thing to be doing. So it's a wonderful escape. And for me, when what I do during the day is so heavy. It's very very serious work, and can be very heavy, and can really weight you down if you're not careful and doing the self-care that it demands. So riding is part of that self-care for me. So there's that. But beyond that, in creating my art, I'm not just trying to speak to the experience of the joys of riding and what it really feels like to be, just to be riding a motorcycle is sort of a magical experience in itself. And I'm saying that, but what I'm saying underneath all that is I'm lifting myself out of my own professional experience,
right,
as a therapist.
Right.
I'm literally taking all these stresses and hurts and traumas that I'm listening to day in and day out, and I'm tying them to a balloon and letting them off into the sky. Right. And that's a freeing thing to be able to do symbolically.
Yeah, no doubt. And, it's funny, I was going to ask you about exactly that. So I have to assume that art has some, therapeutic benefit for you too. And you're about to hear probably the first time in history anyone's quoted Joni Mitchell on a motorcycle podcast, but I'm going to plunge ahead. So she talked about the difference between singing and painting, as she said she paints her joy and she sings her pain. And so for her, there was a difference in those two things. Again, I just can't believe we're having this conversation on a motorcycle podcast, but it's the best example I can give. Right? So it's the best example I can give, to sort of frame the question: do painting and riding do the same thing for you, or are they separate? Or are they two parts of some greater whole?
That's a really good question. I have to think about that. Well, the first thing that I thought of when you said, when you quoted Joni Mitchell there, does it count that I sing in my helmet?
We all do that. I'm sorry, that's not special.
You know what I forget is that when I come to a stoplight, they can hear me. But I think they're parts of the same whole, and they it's interesting. I think that motorcycling is more meditation, and the artwork is more what comes out of that meditation. When you come to the other side of it, then you're able to take all that processing you've done and put it out there. And I think that's part of what motorcycling is to me too. That processing of emotion and thoughts and feelings. Sitting with it and meditating on it, and then I get off the bike and I pick up a pen. Parts to the same whole, but fulfilling a different part of the process.
Right. Right. Yeah, that makes total sense to me. I mean, I have been known to solve writing problems on the bike too. It's not the only reason I ride, that's for sure. But I get that it's they're compatible. They're symbiotic.
Yeah, definitely.
So, so thinking again about this idea of capturing the feeling of riding, which is what, got me so fascinated by your stuff in the first place. Riders use the word free a lot to describe how it feels to ride a bike. But for me, and I think for a lot of riders, it's not really the sort of fist-pumping, angry free that you see in popular culture. It's more, right? It's more childlike almost.
Yeah.
It's kind of, there's a Peter Pan thing.
Well, I think it's less. I think it's less about freedom and more about feeling present.
Right.
And particularly today, when so many of us are just not present. With technology and everything that's connected to it, we kind of check out of the present moment so often during the course of a day, and motorcycling demands that you're there. It's sort of what I was saying with you're not going to eat your sandwich on the motorcycle like you would in the car. Hopefully not, but we all know that distraction is a thing. But it can't be a thing on a motorcycle. And it just demands such a different level of being present and being aware and taking in your surroundings. It's been years since I read Robert Pirsig's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, but I do remember something that he said vaguely about the smells. Right. And feeling the difference in temperature and the air, and you can go down into a pocket of the road where the road takes a dip and suddenly you're cold. You wouldn't notice in a car. You'd have no idea. I can go around a corner and suddenly smell the lilac bush in someone's front yard, or be going down the highway and smell someone's barbecue from on the other side of the barrier, and you get that experience. I mean, you also smell the skunks better,
right?
But but it's such a different experience, and for me, I think that's a big part of what makes riding so wonderful. That you're living, and you're aware that you're living, and people throw around the word freedom, and I think maybe a lot of that has to do with marketing, but there's that. But I think it's more than that.
Yeah, I think so too. And that passage from Pirsig's book is one of the most quoted, from the book, and I think he culminates with the line that the sense of presence is overwhelming, and I think every writer identifies with that. But the thing that I was kind of poking at is this idea that isn't the sum total of the experience. So yes, it's extremely necessary and serious that you be in the present moment and that you be hyper aware. But there's something regressive about that too, right? There's something about being
childlike.
Exactly. This is so present that when you're 7 years old, you don't think about yesterday and you don't think about tomorrow. You just think about where you are right now, and that seems like the joy part. I mean, I feel accomplished if I finish a ride and I don't die, but the euphoria comes from right. The euphoria comes from that balloon somehow. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. There are two things that you're reminding me of that I knew I wanted to bring up while we were talking here. One, that image of the macho rider, the biker dude that we're all so kind of tired of seeing, or at least I'm tired of seeing.
Right.
And that common perception that everybody's a 1%er if they're riding, and not among motorcyclists, but as much, but certainly among people who don't ride or don't know people that ride. Just assume that it's this stereotype that's so pervasive and has been so pervasive for decades, that the biking is this, macho thing, and we're all tough, and I don't know. It's just this very over masculinized. Is that even a word? And hyper masculine thing, where really what motorcycling is to me is that childlike joy of, oh my God, I get to do this again. I can go out to my garage and there's a real motorcycle there, and I can throw a leg over it and go, and I really get to do this. This is so cool.
Yeah.
And that's the feeling.
Yeah.
You know? And to piggyback on that is the image that maybe I'll put this into an image in my art someday, but the image that I keep coming up with is what it felt like to ride a big wheel when I was a kid, being 7 or 8 years old, and being on one of those 3-wheelers with the big wheel up front and tearing down the walkway at my house and spinning out on the driveway.
Right.
Just that total exuberance of lying on a vehicle and just enjoying it for the sake of enjoying it. No posturing. Maybe that's the freedom that everybody's talking about, where not just the freedom of the open road that you think of, but just freedom from any I don't know.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
From cares.
Yeah.
Freedom from cares or expectations or image, I would hope.
Yeah.
And yet there's just so much of that. There's so much posturing.
Yeah.
And I think that the riding community has been moving away from that for a little while. And maybe you could argue that with the advent of social media and Instagram and everything else, there's plenty of posturing to go around.
Yeah.
But but that macho thing is something that I consciously wanted to move away from. I mean, if you look at my the imagery in my artwork, it's all about motorcycles, but there's not a skull in sight.
No, that's right. That's right. Well, so I would have,
and that was one rule that I gave myself when I started this. I didn't want to fall back on the old archetypes.
Right.
I didn't want to do things that had been seen before, because then what's the point? It's been done before. And I didn't want to speak to the stereotypes, because then it's trite and not much value, and not to put down any of the visual language that we're all familiar with already, because it's useful, and there's some incredible art out there that uses it, and I could rattle off a whole bunch of artists that I admire that use it. But finding my own voice, it wasn't going to be there. So I made myself a unspoken promise, I think, that no skulls. And so far I've done it.
Skull-free art. So I was going to actually ask you about the riders in your paintings. So it's interesting to me that they're not heroic, but they're also not anti-heroic. If I think about the cover art for the Bat Out of Hell record, your riders seem exactly exactly like the opposite of that. They all seem like regular guys, and they all seem sort of amazed but unconcerned about what's going on. There's a certain kind of casual, and I say this with affection, goofiness about the profiles of the rider that interest me. Who are these people?
Oh, absolutely. With the goofiness, if it doesn't seem goofy to you, then I haven't been articulate enough with the what I'm trying to show. It's meant to be, like you said, not heroic, not anti-heroic, but everyman.
Right.
And and that's a thing in literature too. I didn't make that connection until you pointed it out to me. But that's exactly what I'm doing. It's not meant to be Meatloaf on flying up the mountaintop and on the album cover for Bat Out of Hell, and it's just meant to be. I think it's the sense of surprise that, to my surprise, never really goes away. I've been riding for 15 years now, and I still get a kick out of it.
Right.
I mean, it's still this goofy feeling of I get to do this.
Yeah.
So I think that was some of what I'm trying to convey, and I'm glad that it gets across that the riders are meant to look a little nonplussed, but still a little goofy, and it's meant to be tongue in cheek.
Yeah, and I think it succeeds, and I think every man is exactly the right way to characterize it. I find myself kind of thinking, I hope I'm actually that guy, because I'm not particularly dangerous or badass, and I don't do epic things, generally speaking. But I would love to look that comfortable and happy on a motorcycle to everyone who sees me. That seems, kind of worthy. About the motorcycles, I mean, I think we agree that the riders are every man. The bikes also seem to me to be every bike.
That's great. To be honest, my process is just I'm endlessly looking at pictures of motorcycles anyway. So I'm constantly looking at different reference photos, and they come from that. More often than not, it's other riders posting their pictures up on social media, and I've had the good fortune to connect with a few of them that I figure out who it is, and whatever photos that's floating around, and connect with them, and hopefully get them to agree to let me use their photo as reference. When I can get a hold of them, and they really are just riders. They're us. They're other guys excited about riding that can get one of their buddies or somebody to take a photo of them while they're riding, and they're excited enough about it that they put it up on social media. And I really feel like what they're trying to say is, look at what I get to do.
Right.
Check out my cool bike. But look at what I'm doing. I'm excited about this myself. I want to share it with you. And I think that then that sort of translates back when I'm sketching up a new drawing. That goofy feeling of it's like unwrapping a present every time you get on a bike. I mean, that's how I feel.
Yeah, me too. I think everybody does. I think not everybody is necessarily equally comfortable admitting it, but I think that's right. Sometimes I see guys out there who look like they're escorting a presidential motorcade, but for the most part, I think we all sort of share that joy, and that's what sort of pleases me about the bikes you've used so far. Is that this is a very tribal pastime in a lot of ways, even though it's pretty ecumenical, and so picking the wrong bike would send signals that would just run away with the whole story, I think, in some ways. And these are sort of vintage bikes but I think most people would understand them simply as standards. If you said, close your eyes and picture a motorcycle,
yeah.
I kind of am picturing the bikes in your paintings.
That was definitely by design. One reason that, to be honest, and a lot of good friends of mine, I think, are disappointed that I don't. But I don't choose to paint one of my all-time favorite bikes, the Honda Hawk GT. It's a classic. It's a cult bike. It's just the coolest thing on two wheels. But it doesn't translate like that. It's a standard bike from a very specific era, and 80s bikes aren't necessarily every bike. So I made a very conscious choice. Part of it was the utility of, modern classics are really popular, and a lot of people have them, so a lot of people are going to understand that visual. And another part of it was it looks like it could be a UJM, it could be a British bike, it could be if it's a boxer and you're looking at the engine, you're going to know. But basically, it's the same configuration. In most of my drawings, it's a bench seat. It's a standard-looking tank. It's probably got low bars because I like that. and most often it's going to be spoked wheels, because that's an immediate connection where you know that bike, even if you don't know what that bike is, you know that bike,
right?
I mean, even with my own drawing, sometimes I have to really look and say, okay, what was I drawing there? Because unless I'm detailed enough with the engine, it really could be anything. I mean, you could be looking at a Honda, you could be looking at a Triumph. If it's a brat bike, it's a brat bike. If it's a classic, it's going to look like a classic. And I like that. I mean, as we're talking here, I'm inking in something new that I'm putting together for the One show in Portland this year. And looking at it, honestly, I think it's a CB750. I'm not all that sure. But I can tell you one thing, it's a UJM.
Yeah.
It's that universal Japanese motorcycle, and it's got a little brat seat, and people are going to recognize that as it's not meant to be an advertisement for a brand, which is subconsciously probably why I don't do a lot of Harleys, but it's meant to be a feeling. It's meant to be just a kind of an impression of the motorcycle, not necessarily a super hyper realistic, faithful representation of that model.
Right.
And there are artists that I absolutely love that are incredible illustrators, that just real draftspersons, and when they depict a certain motorcycle, there's no question that it's that model, and you can probably tell what year and what trim. I don't get that detailed. I'm a little looser with it.
Yeah. Well, and you're not making the same point that they're making either, right?
Right. And they're being a lot more representational, and I'm focusing on the story.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting to see where you take this, because I think that's actually critical. I mean, the images seem almost like dreams that a kid might have of riding. I apologize for keeping on this regression theme, but they do seem to me like dreams kids would have about motorcycles. You mentioned the One show, and so I want to talk a bit about the show scene. You somehow ended up with your work in France, right? I think as a result of your relationship with Lorenzo Radicolor, is that right?
That's right. Yeah. Last year it was the 2017 Cafe Racer Festival in Montlhéry, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But he had invited. There were 8 of us, so himself and 6 other artists and me. And I'm feeling like I don't belong here. And these are well-known. This is their day job, long-time professional cartoonists in the motorcycling scene that are known and loved and respected in France. And what am I doing in their company up on that same wall? It's really mind-blowing to me. But he contacted me and said, we're putting together a show as part of the Cafe Racer Festival, and we're going to have lithographs on display. Actually, that's the way he presented it to me, that he knew that I would love to try my hand at lithographs. And he said, come aboard. We'll show the works together. And what I didn't understand at the time is then it was going to travel, that it wasn't just for Cafe Racer magazine and their festival, but the printer that was going to be producing the lithographs, Nicholas Drager, he was going to be doing other shows throughout the year, and he would bring artwork from his stable, and now that meant me too. So I've been featured in more shows in France than I even know about. And I wouldn't know about them, Bruce, until I saw them on social media.
Oh man!
I'll give you an example. This was a really cool thing. I saw a picture that had been regrammed by Nicholas, either by Nicholas or Lorenzo, but someone had gone to a show that was being hosted at his print shop, and this was just last week. And they took a photo of one of his vintage French bikes and posted it to social media. And the way that they had taken the photograph, this had to be by design, in the mirror, it was a little bar end mirror on this bike. You could see my lithograph hanging on the wall in the mirror.
That's great. That's great.
And this particular show I knew about ahead of time, and I wish I could have been there. But that's often how I was finding out about different shows. He would take it to different moto events and be showing the different prints and lithographs, and it would pop up on his Instagram or his Facebook or what have you. And that's how I'd find out that he was at it again, and I was being shown. So I signed up for the one show, but then it was all over the place, which was really, really very cool.
Yeah.
It's sort of taken on a mind of its own, or a life of its own.
Yeah. Yeah, that's funny, and it's being swept along, by this trend. I mean, I think originally showing art at a motorcycle show was kind of a custom scene thing, and that I think is where Oil and Ink kind of got its start. And art is a big part of the Wheels and Waves thing in Biarritz. But I was at the AIM Expo in Las Vegas, which is about as mainstream as it gets. I mean, it's practically a trade show, and there was a corner at the back of the show reserved for motorcycle art. So it's kind of become a normal part of the scene. And so I'm wondering if you have a point of view on how that happened. What's going on here?
Yeah, I'm just glad it's a thing.
Me
but
too.
I think that it's funny because when you look back at motorcycle culture in the 60s and on up, art has always been connected in some way, and I'll blame Von Dutch. Am I thinking of the right person now? No. Was it Von Dutch? Who is the pinstriper that I'm thinking of?
It could have been him. Besides, it's a great quote. I blame Von Dutch. I think that's probably my headline.
I like that. Kenny Howard. I know him by his actual name and not now by the name he went by. So, of course, we know Von Dutch for the trucker hats now, but Kenny Howard was a pinstriper, and he, if I'm not mistaken, he really launched the whole custom art on cars and motorcycles thing. He was working at a body shop, as I understand it, and had a scratched tank that needed fixing. And rather than repaint the whole thing, he took pinstriping paint and did a design. And the customer loved it so much that other people that he showed it to were coming around and wanted something similar. And then you have the whole pinstriping thing that launched out of that. I don't think that decorative pinstriping was a thing before Kenny Howard.
Right.
Who I don't want to glorify too much because, as I understand it, he was a real jerk. But
so was Picasso, in fairness.
Oh yeah. But I think since then, with the whole hot rod scene and all of that, some sort of art, whether it's a mural on a tank or pinstriping or whatever, has always been part of the scene. And I think it dovetails really nicely with the art of creating a custom motorcycle or creating a custom hot rod, and the art that goes alongside it. Whether it's David Mann or anybody else. The recognizable representational artists that we're all familiar with, like David Ull. I don't know if you're familiar with his work.
No.
He's a contemporary motorcycle artist that does oil paintings, and just really beautiful representational stuff. Mostly portraits with motorcycles involved. It's David Ull, U-H-L, and he does things that to me is sort of a growth out of David Mann, who was painting for Easy Riders all those years. So it's always been around, but now you've got this new custom scene with new young people on the trend. That they're bringing either a new life into it or just bringing it into different venues. I don't know, but I think that it fits together very nicely.
Yeah.
The other thing that I know we were talking about the last time we talked. I think one of the points that I was trying to make was that I think you find a lot of us among motorcyclists. There are a lot of artists out there, and to varying degrees. But I think that that sort of creative bent goes along with why people ride.
Yeah, so that was actually going to be my next question. Something you said earlier reminded me of that exchange in our conversation last week, in which I asked you why you thought motorcycles and art went together, and I was actually kind of surprised at your answer, which was because motorcyclists are creative people. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Well, I can't prove it, but I've known plenty of creatives, lots of photographers. Creative people that I meet motorcycling. We tend to be a daydreaming lot. We tend to, how do I say it? Really not something that I've given a lot of thought to before or since, but I think that's who a lot of us are. We have our heads in the clouds. No pun intended, but
right.
Maybe that's what I'm trying to say with my artwork too. That we're all dreaming from the saddle.
Yeah, it certainly tickled me as an idea because for example, under the heading of artists, an astonishing number of actors ride, like a long list. And one of my sort of dream episodes is to kind of get in under the hood of that phenomenon and find out why. And I wonder whether maybe you've kind of stumbled on part of the answer, that maybe those two things go together. I wonder how many people listening to this would confess to being creative.
That would be really interesting, and I think that we'd be pleasantly surprised by the answer.
Yeah.
Because it's the sort of thing that lends itself to dreamers and creatives and people who like to think outside of the box. If you're not going to ride if you're much of a conformist. Because anyone will tell you these things are dangerous. So, it's not a rational pastime that we're engaging in. I mean, I could go on and on about the mental health benefits of riding and the spiritual aspect of it that I feel, and all these wonderful things that I've come to know about motorcycling in the last 15 years I've been riding. But when you think about it, it makes no rational sense. You're getting on this machine that very well could kill you, and like you said, you feel like you've made an accomplishment when you get off from a ride successfully and you get home safely. I definitely have the same sense of gratitude when I finish a ride, but it doesn't feel. It doesn't feel like a bad idea.
Right. Well,
as much as it probably is, and as much as there's an inherent risk that we all accept when we become riders, it's not something that I'd ever trade.
Yeah, yeah.
And because of everything else that it is. Maybe we're the risk takers, and I'm sure that actors and creatives are among that list.
Yeah, I think you put your finger on it earlier, and I sort of ran off in my head with this idea that we do something unnecessary because it's beautiful, and that actually sounds a lot like art to me. So I think we.
Oh my gosh! Write that down. I want to remember it. We do something unnecessary because it is beautiful.
Right.
And that makes it necessary, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. We've probably lost, half of the audience by now, but it's going to get nerdier before it's over. Trust me. Do you have a sense?
I'm going to make you work editing.
Yeah. Well, that's okay. It always is, with many thanks to the rural high-speed miracle that I live with. Do you have a sense of who buys this work at these shows? What is there anything about these people that sets them apart from motorcyclists in general, or is that who they are?
I wish I could figure that out. They're all people who either ride or love someone who rides. I've sold a lot of prints and paintings to people who either recognize the person that's in my the person that's in the image. Sometimes someone's girlfriend gets a hold of me, or somebody's wife, and I really want to surprise them with this because it's him. So that's always cool when the subject becomes the recipient, or someone who they're looking for a gift and they get it for a rider. But most often it's a rider like ourselves that recognizes something of themselves in that in that picture, and maybe they feel the same way that I do about wanting to capture that moment in a more permanent way.
Yeah.
And they end up taking it home. There are two images that, and I don't think it's because they're the oldest ones, but there are two images that have gotten the most play more than any others, and it's the kite, and it's the one with the dog. And I've also found that there are a lot of riders with dogs, and I don't know what that says about us, but that seems to connect with anybody who who has a dog. And I don't know what it is about the one with the kite, but people seem to really connect with it.
Yeah.
But really, there's been no rhyme or reason that I can tell. Who buys it and who likes it and who walks by. If I could, find the answer and bottle it, then I definitely would. But it seems to just be by happy chance. People find it and connect with it and understand what I'm trying to say.
Yep. Well, I guess not everything needs to be explained. I just wondered if, I guess what I hoped I would not hear is that these were trophy collectors of some kind, or that there was a cultural elite in the motorcycling community that was consuming all this stuff. And I think what I hear you saying is that, no, it's just guys like you and me, guys in the non-gender specific sense, obviously.
Well, I'm pretty sure that, there are definitely collectors out there of motorcycle art. I don't think they're collecting me. Most of what I do are commissions for people that want to give it as a gift, or people that buy prints. And in the art world at large, I think I'm small potatoes, but there's definitely that part of the art world that turns its eye towards moto specific stuff. I mean, you look at the Suited Racer. I don't know if you follow him.
Yep.
But he's had I think 2 shows now at Art Basel in Miami, which is just complete and utter craziness, for the art world, and it plays down there. So there is that side of things, but what I'm doing feels a lot more grassroots. The people that are buying my work are buying it because they're riders and they get it. As far as I can tell.
Yeah.
And what's cool is that with some of these shows, at least the ones that are local that I've been able to go to in person, I get to meet the people that are into it and that are connecting with it, and it's interesting to get their feedback, and find out a little bit about what caught their eye and what spoke to them.
Yeah, and I have to believe ultimately that's influential on your work because, the way you described the process to me, you've sort of felt your way into these images rather than thought your way into them. And in a process like that, it's so valuable to hear how, what kind of impact you're having. So I get that. When we spoke last week, you mentioned the Art of the Motorcycle, which is the exhibit that was mounted at the Guggenheim in 1998, caused all kinds of fuss.
Oh yeah,
and I actually had mentioned in an earlier episode that it was one of my great regrets not to have gone. And
mine too.
Yeah, that remains the case. But it occurred to me after we spoke that show was really about motorcycles as art, as opposed to art about motorcycles. Right. So I'm curious to know what you think an artist adds when they create an image of one. If we accept that motorcycles can inherently be beautiful, what does the artist add?
Well, we're talking then about the difference between the motorcycle as an art object and a representation that has the opportunity to tell a story.
Right.
That is the object. I like to think of my artwork as a storybook, and I think that's because that's where a lot of my inspiration came from. All the children's books that I've read with my own kids, and the sort of fanciful images that are in that sort of thing. And when you have a painting or a print or a screen print or litho or what have you, you have the opportunity to tell a story. And as much as I believe that the show that was at the Guggenheim was legitimate art, it was not exactly sculpture. It was more the industrial as an art object, or as a desirable object, or as an aesthetic object, but not art in the sense that we would think about it, which is fine and perfectly appropriate for a show at the Guggenheim. But I definitely focus on the story, and I think that's what painting does. Where you can create a narrative and create a world, and it's an environment that the viewer can get lost in,
right?
Or at least consider.
Right. Yeah, that's a great answer. That makes perfect sense. Just sort of staying with that Guggenheim show for a second. There was a critic at the time, or a historian, I think, who, having seen the show, described it as representing, and I'm going to quote him or her now, representing the end of a cycle of demonization and social rejection of motorcyclists, which was a pretty grand statement. Does that resonate for you?
I think that... for one, we probably read the same article because I vaguely remember that, and I think it's really poignant. Where we were talking before about that whole macho stereotype that we're all saddled with, and I'm thinking of a Leanings article written by Peter Egan some years ago, where he told the story of how he had to park his motorcycle a couple miles down the road from a restaurant and ditch his leather jacket so that he could go into the restaurant and not be turned away. And I think that would have been back in the 60s. There's such a strong a strong image that people have of what a motorcycle is, and thanks to the Hollister riots,
right?
And that may or may not have actually happened, and so we all have this strong image of the macho biker and how it's this unsavory thing. And I think that's been chipped away over the last 20 years or so, because you have professionals that are riding, and it's not considered something that's undesirable anymore. And when your dentist is riding, it sort of legitimizes it a little bit. And when you have an entire generation whose parents might ride, or when I was in college, let me tell you, I work in New Haven in Connecticut, and my office is a couple of blocks from the center of Yale campus, and I cannot go to lunch on the Triumph without once I've parked, some professor coming out of the woodwork and regaling me with a story about the Triumph that they rode back in the 60s or the 70s when they were in school.
Yep.
Every single time.
Yeah. I think that's a Triumph thing.
And I really think that, it's become establishment acceptable to a degree because, those people have become the establishment. The kids grew up.
Yeah, I think that's right. The one thing I don't think has been sort of studied enough, there's this meme in the industry that young people aren't riding motorcycles and therefore the industry is going to die. And I haven't actually seen data to prove that that's true. And I suspect, in fact, that it is not true, and that they're making a leap from soft sales to the idea that the younger generation has somehow rejected motorcycling. And not only does it seem to me that they haven't, but I look at statistics like one that was released this week by the AMA about women who ride motorcycles having attained 20% now. So 1 in 5 of all motorcyclists are women. So you sort of stand back and look at that and you say, okay, let's suppose there are more young people riding, and let's suppose there are more women riding. It seems to me that we're in the process of creating a whole new stereotype, or maybe a richer, somehow palette of stereotypes, but that the old paradigm just doesn't fit anymore. And I wonder if that's part of what you're talking about there.
Absolutely. And as we're talking about this, I'm wondering if all that data that seems to be, spelling out the doom of motorcycling, is accounting for all the used motorcycles that people are buying. Because I see a lot of vintage iron out there.
Yep.
And it's become very much the hip thing. I lived in Queens some years ago, in a part of Queens called Greenpoint. Actually, I think Greenpoint is Brooklyn at that point. I think it is, right on the border. And so I was in Ridgewood, right near Greenpoint, and I used to hang out down there all the time. And there was a shop called Works Engineering, and I'm not sure if they're still there anymore. They might be. And they only dealt in vintage bikes, and the sort of standard bike that is so familiar and so familiar in my work, and that's what everybody wanted. All the younger riders that were just getting into it, all the kids that thought that this was the cool thing that they needed to be doing. They weren't going out and buying new motorcycles, because who could? They were getting old motorcycles and turning them into brat bikes or fixing them up or whatever, taking them to these small shops and getting them running, or trying to turn a wrench themselves. And all this data, I don't think accounts for eBay and Craigslist and a sign out on the front lawn.
No. And if that's true, and I think there's some good evidence that it might be, then I would expect that generation to bring along with it, its taste for maker culture and for a kind of more holistic, creative way of being in the world. Anyway, I guess that's a pretty deep rabbit hole, so maybe I'll just move on. So
Yeah.
so this actually brings us to the question, which will, I think, will cause us to achieve peak nerdiness. So this is sort of a strange question, but bear with me. So I really enjoy following the custom scene. I actually don't mind getting those bike XIF, emails in my, inbox a few times a week. And there is a movement in the custom scene towards, making bikes that are almost expressionist, if you like. So, in other words, they're designed primarily to have an emotional impact as opposed to, to elevating function to art, if you like. And it's almost like what people are doing is interpreting the motorcycle in art, and then someone turns around and builds a motorcycle based on the art, if that makes sense. So there's like two layers of interpretation. You look at, builders like Shinya Kimura, for example. Here's a guy who doesn't collaborate with clients at all, doesn't ever build from a plan. He's a total auteur, builds all of his bikes in this kind of flow state. That sounds a lot like art to me. So without falling too far down that rabbit hole, here's the question: do you think that motorcycle art is having an impact back on motorcycles and on motorcycling?
Well, if that's the truth, then I want to start designing motorcycles I'd like to see. But I think that would be really cool if it were true. I think that the scene definitely impacts the what the actual manufacturers start to do. And I think that the custom scene has definitely changed what we're starting to see produced. It would be a really cool thought if what the artists are creating are also affecting what gets produced and what gets produced by the custom scene. I think with those art piece type of builds, like El Solitario and guys like that, I don't know that they're really taking reference from anything. Something like the wackiest bikes I think I've ever seen have come out of El Solitario, with the wicker bike that they made, and that thing that it was like a wire frame.
Yeah,
I saw
the Imposter. It was called.
The first few pictures that. Yeah, the first few pictures that dropped out of that, I thought, oh, cool. They're making a buck to pound out some aluminum bodywork. I didn't realize that was the bodywork. And that's just pure art piece. I mean, we talk about the Guggenheim show. That was actual motorcycles that had been produced and were being shown in a retrospective as industrial design. This is actual sculpture that just happens to turn a crank.
Right.
and may or may not go down the road. And sometimes it hits the mark and hopefully strikes a nerve and people, turns people on. And sometimes it's just, the world's not ready. But I know I'm glad that it's happening.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Do you think that the artwork is affecting what they're doing?
Well, I don't suppose it's doing it in a literal way, or that the references are conscious. But it just seems like this recursive loop is going on where culture is interpreting motorcycling, and then motorcycling is interpreting itself back to culture somehow. I'm sure I'll get letters about this, but it feels maybe what we're seeing is a kind of breaking down of the boundary between those two things, which I guess was the theme of the Guggenheim show, and we talked about it at the very top of our conversation, in a sense that that we're connecting better and understanding each other better, and this is art celebrating that fact somehow. I don't know. It's but I've sure seen a lot of custom bikes that look more like brushstrokes than they look like machine work, and it's hard not to wonder if there's a connection there.
I might never look at a custom the same way again. I think you may be right.
Well, I was proud of that question. I thought that was super nerdy, and so maybe it's time to bring this thing
Well,
home. So, what's next for you? Are you going to continue to? Hopefully, you're going to continue to do this. Are you going to continue to explore this motif, or are things evolving? What's your work going to look like a year or two down the road?
it's funny. I've gotten to a point where I was actually just talking about this today with a artist friend of mine, Christopher Mayotte, who's up in New Hampshire, and I was saying that I want to try different mediums. I want to branch out from the sort of watercolor and certainly the digital that I've been doing, which comes into play in a lot of my prints. And I want to get more into oils, a little bit of acrylics and acrylic inks, maybe some printmaking with block printing and that sort of thing. I mean, there's so much that I could explore just from a materials standpoint, let alone the content. So the bikes and balloons thing, I don't think I've exhausted yet, and I hope no one's tired of it yet. But I've got a lot of that left in me. But at the same time, there are other themes that I have bouncing around in my head, and things I want to explore, and things I want to do, just for the sake of polishing the craft. So I have no intention of stopping anytime soon. It's like asking someone if they're going to stop motorcycling.
Right.
Some of us are just not. Some of us are just not built to stop. That's definitely me on both points. I have no intention of stopping motorcycling, and certainly no intention of stopping the art. Hopefully I'll be you'll be seeing a lot more from me in the future.
Good. And hope somehow that your journey brings you up to Canada. If we don't somehow cross paths in the States, I'd love to actually shake your hand. How can people get a look at what you're doing and maybe even have some of your work in their own homes? Where should I send them?
Well, my primary outlet for social media, which seems to be where everything is today, is Instagram. And you can find me at Tempus Deficit. And I'll spell it because it's Latin. It's TEMPUSDEFICIT. And I'm pretty sure if you Google my name or put my name into a the search driver for Instagram, you'll find me too. But I have an Etsy shop, and that's primarily how I sell my works when I'm not at a show. And that's the Etsy shop is also Tempus Deficit, spelled the same. And you can email me directly at tempusdeficit@gmail.com. And I feel like I should explain the handle.
I was just going to ask you, because I think that means time is short, right? There's a go fast, time is short Latin phrase that's sort of bouncing around the back of my head.
That's right.
Yeah.
Celeriter, or I don't know how to pronounce it, but ride fast, time is short. I saw a patch actually that said that years ago, and I liked it, and it stuck with me. And the time is short is sort of a double meaning. On one hand, it's that this is what I do on the side. It's not my full-time thing, so I'm always scrapping for time to do what I do, and sketch a little here and paint a little there, and it can take me forever to finish a piece, just because there's so much else going on. So yeah, time is short, and on the other hand, the flip side of that is that I'm very conscious of this feeling that as an artist, the clock is ticking. I don't have forever to say what I have to say, and when I'm done, I'm done. So I want to get as much of the vision that I have in my head onto paper, or onto canvas as I can while I can.
Yeah, that's something artists, I think, somehow know better than most of us, but I think it's true for all of us. Yeah, I think I'll probably include that in my show notes too, and I will figure out how to pronounce the first half of that because I love it. It's right up there with yeah, right. Well, Doug, I've really enjoyed speaking with you, and I can't wait to see what you do next. As I think I told you, I've got a print of yours hanging on the wall behind me as we speak, as I sit here, and meeting you has made me like it even more. So thank you for your time.
Well, thank you very much, Bruce. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed this, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come on the podcast and have another chat with you and talk art and talk motorcycles. And it's really a pleasure to be able to combine the two and talk about it. So thank you for having me on.
Well, it's a pleasure. Ride safe out there, and hopefully we'll get a chance to shake hands out on the road somewhere.
I truly hope so.
Bye now.
Bye now, Bruce. Thank you.
Risk is a funny thing. When people talk about it, it's almost always in terms of the odds that something might fail. We look at an opportunity, an investment, a relationship, a dangerous activity, and we judge it according to whether we think something will or won't go sideways. Or at least that's what we do when we see someone else taking a risk. But when it's us rolling the dice, the calculus is a little more nuanced. Winning and losing aren't quite so black and white, and we think about the price of something going wrong. Not just that we're betting, but what we're betting, and whether we can afford to lose. And maybe most of all, at least if we're smart, we think about what we might get if we win. The possibility of something going wrong doesn't mean much until we can compare it to the prize we get when it doesn't. Well, I'm a pretty cautious person, so I think it surprised some people when I started riding motorcycles, not just because I'm a grown-up and should know better, but because my whole life had been shaped by the fact that I rarely did anything more dangerous than eating sushi. I suspect that to my friends and family, me disappearing for hours on a howling death machine made about as much sense as me playing Russian roulette, which is to say, none at all. And that, I realize now, is because they could only see half the equation. They could only see the risk, but not why that risk is worth taking. And even if they were to watch me ride, they still wouldn't get it, because the prize is all in my head, where nobody can see it. And it kind of defies description. One recent listener email put it like this. He called it, and I quote, "the feeling I discovered the first time I gunned the engine, and that I feel every time I get to escape on my bike." And went on to write that it's so hard to put into words that he resorts to telling people, if I have to explain it, then you just wouldn't understand. I think that's how art and motorcycles finally found each other. Doug made a strong point that motorcyclists are often creative people, but I think there's something more fundamental at work here, and that's the unique ability of art to explain what words can't. People who don't ride can never really understand why we do. They can see the danger, but they can't see the feeling. When we're drawn to a piece of motorcycle art, I think it's because we see the feeling. It's tangible, anybody can understand it, and it makes us think that maybe we're not crazy after all. A picture sometimes really is worth 1,000 words. And for me, that picture is a goofy, slightly bewildered-looking rider whose bike has just taken flight, and who can't quite believe his luck. Well, thanks for listening. You'll find show notes for this episode at thismotorcyclelife.com, including contact information for Douglas Thompson, alias Tempus Deficit. That's also how you can reach me if you have questions, comments, or suggestions. Emailing me at thismotorcyclelife@gmail.com works too, and every email will get an answer. You can also follow me on Instagram, where I like to post pictures of bikes I find on the street, and where you can follow a lot of the people I've interviewed for this podcast, including Tempus Deficit. Well, this episode's playlist recommendation comes with a bit of a story. Some listeners may have noticed in an Eat Sleep Ride post last fall that my wife got her motorcycle license during the summer. Unfortunately, she also got a torn rotator cuff thanks to a crash in the rain during her course. This month, as she was consulting with an orthopedic surgeon, the team there wanted to know how she'd hurt herself. Well, one thing led to another. This podcast came up, and it turned out that one of the people taking care of her is in a band. This is that band. They're called Across the Board, and the track is called Sonic Boom. It's a bit about being in love, and it's a lot about flying. You can buy it wherever you like to get your music, and in the meantime, keep staying alive out there.
Not afraid to try, not afraid to sing to the sky. Put your head close to mine, feel my temperature rise. Don't you try, nothing's gonna stand in my way. Take the sun from my day, try to rain on my parade. Ooh, ooh. You've got me feeling like I'm just another rocket falling from